A ne. Dobro večer svima. Sad se nadam da se čujemo. Da li se čujemo sada? Želim da mi neko javi da li se čujemo ili ne. Ok. Dobro večer svima. Dajde da pozdravim ja. Čat Vladimir je bio prvi, Bobe, pozdrav, Moke, pozdrav, Vojnić, hello, Mario Pavlović, Vesko, pozdrav, Mekse je tu, odlično, Miloš Martinović, i Nightbot se javio, pozdrav Nightbot, Miljan Jukić, Tanja, Tanica, Finger Mistake, dobro večer sa velikim črkama. Sada da vidimo, ja sam pripremio nešto za Sopanelaša, evo ovako, Sopanelaša, Moke, jučer me pitao da li imamo neke žrtve vulkana i to, pa sam mislio da će danas, da sakupio sam par linkova, sad da vidim ako mogu ja to da pogledam. Aha. Znači, ovo mislim da sam htio da igram, da. Evo, izvinite mi malo, molim vas, sad sam tu, sam sa sobom, borim se i sa OBS-om i tako dalje. Pa trebam da... Aha, bila je 0, dobro, odlično. To je dugo malo, ali možem i ja nešto popričati usput. Sad hoću malo da riskiram. Pa šta? Da. To je to. Sada još jedna malo. Ili sam pogriješio opet. Da, opet sam pogriješio. Jebela cesta. Moj dragi. Evo me.
Journey around the Pacific Rim and you experience a multitude of sensations, each helping define a culture, and it is one as old as time itself. Like sentinels, they watch over our daily lives as we revel in their beauty. But when they wake, their fury transcends all cultures.
Forcing us to face an age-old question. What do we do when sleeping giants wake? To live along America's west coast is to live among giants. These massive mountains of the Cascades reign supreme over a domain that spans 3 states. For millions, their silhouettes are a welcome backdrop against the horizon. This volcanic range has remained relatively silent for hundreds of years, a fact that causes many to view them merely as beautiful mountains.
It's the first thing we look at in the morning and the last thing we look at night. We love it.
The truth is, these mountains are part of the infamous Ring of Fire, a chain of volcanoes that encircle the Pacific Ocean and include 70% of the Earth's active volcanoes. As the population of the West Coast continues to grow, more and more people are choosing to live in the shadow of these volcanoes. The question that needs to be answered is, are Americans prepared to face the potential hazards of this choice?
Hazards at volcanoes don't change. The hazards in the Cascades are the same as they were 1,000 years ago. What changes is the risk. And we create risk by putting ourselves in the areas where the hazards are.
For many, the likelihood of an eruption seems so far removed they don't even know what the risks are. Yet this attitude could prove disastrous.
The Cascade Range is a particular concern to the U.S. Geological Survey because many of the volcanoes in the Cascade Range have erupted frequently over the geologic past. They are still considered active, and they will erupt again. It's only a question of when.
While we wait for the inevitable eruption in the Cascade Range, there is much we can learn from those who have first-hand experience. Since the entire country is made up of volcanic islands, the people of Japan take a very proactive approach to dealing with volcanic hazards. Located on the Unzen Peninsula is the city of Shimabara. Surrounded by farmland, this community of 42,000 represents the epitome of rural Japanese living. Across their country, this area is known for its involvement with the Christian uprising, its clear spring water, for being the birthplace of the famous sculptor Seibo Kitamura, and for being the home of the country's newest mountain. The center of the peninsula is made up of a complex of volcanoes, often collectively referred to as Mount Unzen. The peak called Fugandaki used to be lower in elevation than its Siamese twin Unzen, but that changed in the mid-90s when the volcano recreated itself building a massive dome. In doing so, Fugandaki unleashed one destructive event after another on the peaceful tenants that inhabit its flanks.
We received a great amount of damage to the area, so people were asked to evacuate to the designated areas. The evacuation took place in auditoriums and hotels, as well as passenger boats. Children were kept from going to school, and their summer vacation had to start earlier than scheduled. Children also had to wear helmets and masks. People moved into temporary housing, and then, upon its completion, into public housing.
Pyroclastic flows, comprised of superheated gas, ash, and stone, seared the mountain's flanks. Homes and farms, centuries old, were wiped away.
During the volcanic activities, it began with a pyroclastic flow, which led to a fire that burned down the houses. There were 50 houses in the area, but all the houses were destroyed. I did not actually see the fire damage when it started, but it is kind of like an atomic bomb explosion, which leaves nothing.
Many families were evacuated several different times before being forced permanently from their houses. For some, the repeated evacuations instilled a false sense of security and added to the shock when their homes, generations in the making, were finally devoured.
The first pyroclastic flow, we were very afraid because it was so sudden and we had to evacuate so quickly. And then, during the month of June, it didn't seem so bad because the flow had already kind of carved a path. It started in May and ended on June 24th. Although I did not actually see it with my own eyes when it happened, my house was blown up by the force of fire and did not leave any debris.
Another side effect of volcanic activity is mud flows, or lahars. Channeled by river valleys, volcanic debris combines with water to form a fast-moving wall of hot sludge. As lahars sweep downstream, they leave nothing but a wake of unbelievable destruction. In Shimabara, entire neighborhoods, once nestled among trees and rice fields, were completely buried.
だいたい1回目はもっと北でのところに橋
The north part over there was actually the first to go because of its physical geography being the lowest, and then little by little, it spread over to this area.
それで噴火から
It took roughly 2.5 years for it to come to this condition.
この辺はもう全部民家ですよね。
This area was covered with houses all around here, all the way down to the highway. Down by the ocean, there were also scattered rice fields.
Though the loss of property was great, prior planning did save countless lives. Shimabara's warning system is state-of-the-art. Numerous cameras keep a constant vigil on the mountain. There are 73 speakers set up at strategic locations throughout the city. Whenever there is an emergency, live broadcasts inform the people what is happening and what they should do. If it all seems routine, that's because for them it is. From 1993 to 1996, there were 34 separate evacuations of up to 7,000 people at one time. Some of the evacuees lived in temporary housing for up to 2.5 years. Fugandaki again fell silent in 1996, but the threat of mud flows remain. As a result, the warning systems are still activated whenever there is heavy rainfall, which here is common for 3 months out of every year. Besides the police and fire departments, there are close to 400 townspeople designated to help with evacuation procedures. In a culture that thrives on conformity, it may seem strange to find that the people have been taught to take individual responsibility for their lives and not to rely on the government.
The city of Shimabara has organized evacuation training sessions once a year. People are instructed by their district personnel for evacuation to the designated areas. From a training session, I personally learned that I have to protect my own life. They tell people to think about their own lives and take care of themselves, especially when danger seems clear and present. They tell people to help each other too, especially the sick and elderly.
Despite the hardships, the people who live here have no plans of leaving.
Tu bi se ja sada malo zaustavio, samo da vam napomenem da ovo što ste upravo sada čuli, a to jeste da sama vlast kaže Japancima da treba da se sami pobrinu za sebe i da ne trebaju da budu ovisni o vlasti, o government. I to je rijetko čuti, zato sam i ovo predstavio, jer možete to prevesti u svakodnevni život i to je mudrost koju treba da se držite uvijek. Da li ima opasnosti, nema opasnosti, bolje je da ste samostojni, da znate poskrbite za sebe i za svoje najbliže i onda tek pomognete i drugim, ali prvo kao u avionu, prvo treba da staviš sebi masku, pa onda drugim. Jedan udah možda je previše, tako da samo se držite ovoga, da budete samostojni.
This is their home, and most say there is nowhere else they would rather be.
これ今度の場合は火山活動でですね。
Japan as a country is prone to having such volcanic activity, so where can you go that's going to be 100% safe? And in addition to that, people here in Shimabara have a deep-rooted love for their home. Despite the fact that the damage was severe, the people have rebounded.
While living on the flanks of volcanoes is a necessity in Japan, along America's west coast, people still have a choice in the matter.
In the United States, we have enough land that if it's used wisely, and if land use practices, planning and zoning and so forth are used properly, we could avoid development of hospitals and communities and towns and villages in areas that will be destroyed by future volcanic eruptions.
In the old days, logging is what drew people to the towns of McLeod, Mount Shasta, and Weed. But no more. These days, all reasons seem connected to one impressive centerpiece.
You've got a climbing community that, it's absolutely an awesome mountain. You have a skiing community that thinks it's wonderful. Visibly, everybody that comes up here, when they buy a home, they want a view of Mount Shasta because it is so tremendous. There's a New Age community that looks at it for their reasons. There's a lot of different religions that are attracted to it for their reasons. So it's extremely important to all the North State economy.
People come here to attain a certain quality of life, and most don't care to worry about the possibility of an eruption.
I just love the mountain, and if something happened, I guess I would take means to get out of here, but I never think about it. It's like I chose to live here, and everyone wants to come here on vacation, and I live in the vacation land, so I get to enjoy it every day.
There is, however, some cause for awareness, if not concern.
You have about a 1 in 25 or 30 chance of seeing an eruption in any decade, or if you multiply that out of a person lives to be 70 or 80 years old, there's about a 1 in 3 or 4 chance that if you lived here your whole lifetime, you'd witness an eruption from Shasta. Which of course is a lot better odds than you get with the state lottery or something like that.
When the odds finally do play out, the communities that skirt Mount Shasta will indeed face real danger.
Well, Mount Shasta is a volcano that tends to erupt like Mount St. Helens. It tends to be a more explosive volcano, and when it erupts, it produces particularly large volumes of pyroclastic flow materials. It also produces mud flows because of the snow and ice on the upper part of the volcano. At Mount Shasta, the pyroclastic flows have been very voluminous in the past, and they have gone down nearly all flanks of the volcano at high speeds, and they've gone out to distances of at least 30 kilometers or 20 miles from the volcano.
The towns around Mount Shasta house 50% of the county's population and are built right on top of these old flows.
Volcanoes like Unzen make it very clear that once the town is there and the pyroclastic flows begin, one has really serious problems. People have to be evacuated, hopefully in time. It's difficult to keep people out of their towns until they've been destroyed. And the consequences are very costly for civilization when pyroclastic flows sweep through a village and destroy it.
So even if the citizens aren't concerned, government agencies should be. In order for evacuations to work, there must be prior planning. The towns here coordinate their efforts with the county.
Because of it being a rural area, there are very few evacuation routes. We basically have a main north-south route and one east-west route, and there aren't any other ways of getting out of here. So planning-wise, the routes are already identified. It's just knowing which routes are going to be open for any given set of circumstances.
No matter what the circumstances, the impact of an eruption would most likely reach far beyond this county. The I-5 corridor, the major route for traffic heading up and down the west coast, runs right by Mount Shasta.
It doesn't take much ash to really wreak havoc. Now, Mount Shasta historically has not been a big ash producer, but all it would take would be perhaps 5 centimeters of ash, a couple of inches of ash, to fall in this area, to accumulate on the interstate, and you can imagine how that would disrupt traffic. The other thing is, of course, this is a narrow air corridor. Flights from the Pacific Northwest go on one side of the mountain, flights from Southern California to that area go on the other side. And as has happened with the Alaskan volcanoes, if a plane is caught in the plume from the volcano, the grit will get in, damage the jet engines, and they often have to make emergency landings. So there's a potential for really disrupting air traffic.
The potential for disaster is increased when eruptions occur during inclement weather. Radar systems on board aircraft cannot tell the difference between a normal cloud bank and a cloud of ash.
It may cause loss of power on the engines. This has happened a number of times. There have yet to be any crashes as a result of this, but it has cost tens or hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide over the last 25 years or so.
There are about 3,500 permanent residents in the town of Mount Shasta, and most of them share the same attitude.
Most of the locals, those that have either been born and raised here or been here for a lot of years, don't think much of it at all. Maybe we should, I don't know, but we don't think much of it at all. And so it's the folks that are coming in that think a lot more of it. And typically, I think we think that, you know, the geologists and a lot of people that it kind of ends up in the newspapers on a continual basis. They just don't have much else to print or report on. So about every 1 or 2 years, you know, it shows up again and everybody gets stirred up for a minute and then it all dies down.
I think that there's no problem. There's 100% probability that the mountain will erupt. It's just a matter of when, and it may happen in our lifetime, it may not. If it happens, you know, we'll react and get the word out and do the best we can. It may not happen, so why worry about it?
This may be easy to say when an eruption does not appear imminent, but would they feel the same way when actually faced with the unthinkable? From 1993 through 1996, there were more than 82 pyroclastic flows from Mount Vulkani, and though it is dwarfed in size by the Cascade Mountains, there were also numerous mud flows. In all, 44 people were killed, while more than 2,500 homes and precious acres of farmland were engulfed. Nevertheless, the Japanese government is not about to surrender this land to a massive construction projects are underway to repair the damage and prevent further destruction by future eruptions. To do this, they are building a series of some 80 sabo or sediment dams in the valleys leading away from the volcanoes.
The function of the sediment dams is to control the mud flow and to prevent it from overlaying large areas at one time.
Dams of this type have been used in Japan for close to 100 years, but there are several aspects of this project that are unprecedented. One is its size. The project began in 1992 and will continue for at least 20 years. It involves moving deposits from one side of the mountain to the other. Every day, 800 loads of volcanic debris are scooped, trucked across town, then dumped as fill. The use of satellites is another first for this type of operation.
Because of the inability to predict sudden massive amounts of debris flow above the Sabo dams, we deemed it was necessary to undergo this activity of using remote control.
Like giant children's toys, these earth movers roam about seemingly unattended. As a result of these efforts, land that just a year ago resembled the surface of the moon is once again becoming rich farmland. And rather than being apprehensive, most people can't wait for the new Sabo dams to be completed so they can return to their ancestral homes.
I have childhood and school memories of it being incredibly beautiful, but these memories have been erased. They disappeared instantly. It was a beautiful place. Now there is nothing left, It seems like my past has vanished.
はい、今、かさ上げ事業、それから
But since government agencies are taking necessary steps to make the area safe, I feel that in the future I will live in the same area once again.
When we look at a country like Japan, it appears as if technology and engineering can be used to circumvent most, if not all, problems associated with volcanoes. But in order to accomplish this, there must be a tremendous dedication of resources, something not all countries are willing or able to do.
Well, in some places you may be able to intervene, put the proper countermeasure. But I think the strategy is really just to deflect flows away from developed areas, away from towns, away from cities if you can. But there are places when you have to give up. If a town is along the way and you put a barrier, the lahars will just fill this up and then later on attack the town.
This has been the case with a large volcano in the Philippines. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo woke from a 500-year sleep to create crisis on an international scale.
Thousands of American military families and civilian workers have been evacuated from Clark Air Base and Subic Naval Station in the Philippines. The mass evacuation was prompted by the eruption of Mount Pinatubo.
The United States had 2 large military bases in harm's way, and members of the United States Geological Survey's Volcano Crisis Assistance Team were brought in to help determine what the volcano might do. They and their Filipino colleagues from the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology accurately predicted that the volcano was building up to something big. As outward signs of the mountain's activity increased, the Philippine government and the U.S. military heeded the scientists' advice and evacuated, a move that ended up saving thousands.
The climactic eruption at Pinatubo was about 2 in the afternoon local time. And that was when we bugged out because of all of our equipment had been destroyed. We were no longer serving any function standing there in the path of the potential pyroclastic flows, and so we left.
With the eruption in full swing, very dark, basically the sun in the middle of the day is blotted out. It's a very dark. It's a special kind of dark. It's a kind of a smothering dark. As we drove away, we're being showered by pieces of pumice, perhaps golf ball size, and ash coming down continuously. Extremely difficult to drive in.
A few hours later, the big earthquake started, and they went pretty much through the night and into the next day. There was a combination of having had the tropical storm pass through as the volcano was erupting and ensuring that all the ash that fell was wet, so you had 6 inches or 12 inches of wet cement on your roof, and in shaking everything with magnitude 3s and 4s and even I guess a 5 that caused most of the damage. The roofs collapsed, the buildings fell in.
About 1 million people were evacuated during the eruptions at Mount Pinatubo. Yet still, at least 300 died, overrun by pyroclastic and mud flows and trapped under collapsed roofs. More than 10,000 of the evacuees were permanently displaced. So now, most of these people live in relocation settlements built by the government. This eruption of Pinatubo was much larger than the one at St. Helens in 1980, and it indicates just how long a volcano can disrupt people's lives, often changing how they live forever.
That eruption produced such a large volume of loose fragmental material that piled up around the volcano, and now that material is being redistributed downstream by water in the form of lahars or mud flows. The chronic effects of the eruption are probably worse than the acute effects that occur during and immediately after the eruption.
In tropical settings like the Philippines that have prolonged rainy seasons where it's normal to experience numerous typhoons every year, the problems with lahars are amplified. The rains carve gullies hundreds of feet deep into the debris on Pinatubo slopes and wash it to the valley floors below.
We have one worst case scenario where 30 million cubic meters of lahar came down during one rainfall. And that's a lot. If you imagine about 10 cubic meters can be loaded in one truck, 10 cubic meters, 30 million would require 3 million.
Year after year, the flows continue.
We are here at Mangkatyan Porac, very near the active channel, Pasig Potrero, which is one of the most critical channel for lahar in the eastern side.
From 1991 through 1996, 350 million cubic meters of volcanic material have come down this channel alone. Mount Pinatubo stopped erupting the same year it began, yet it still continues to disrupt people's lives. Bacolor is located some 30 miles from the mountain. It was first hit by lahars in 1992, but the worst occurred in October of '95. When a dike constructed to hold back the debris failed, 3 to 4 meters of silty mud buried a large section of town. The community's grand cathedral cracked under the strain, but withstood the blow. Now, however, parishioners must enter through what used to be a second-story window.
Damage to properties can be seen all around. And then, as to the number of lives lost, the figure that we are always ready to talk about is something like 40 to 50 people lost. But there are families who keep insisting that they have not found their loved ones. And the tally of this amounts to something like 1,000 people missing during that one episode.
The danger of lahars here continues to this day. But rather than abandon the area completely, some people have chosen to rebuild their homes on stilts. The theory being that with its path unobstructed, the next lahar will simply flow past.
The fact that Bacolor is the premier town of Pampanga, this was once the capital of the province, and at one time also the capital of the Philippines. So this is populated by most of the old rich and the influential people of Pampanga, and they just don't want to abandon the place even if it is already being hit by lahars.
It is a common response the world over. Few want to admit that their land or towns cannot be saved, a fact that can frustrate scientists. In the Philippines, they have warned people that it will take at least 10 years for many of the areas around Mount Pinatubo to stabilize.
Well, you just draw the hazard map and show people that these are the possible places that may be impacted by lahars. But as volcanologists, we cannot control people. As long as we tell them that that is a possibility and people are willing to take the risk, then so be it. The best thing really is to move people away from the source of the hazard. But that's easier said than done.
In communities like Porac, the population of 72,000 have suffered ever since June 15th in 1991.
I thought it was the end of the world. There were thunders, there were earthquakes. Those were simultaneous. There were rains with mud, and buildings are collapsing. Businesses were closed, and the houses are full of sand.
As bad as it seemed then, things got worse. After the major eruptions, the town continued to be plagued by mud flows. From 1991 through 1993, around 600 homes were destroyed in Porac alone. and about 500 acres of land right along the riverbanks were lost.
Since 1991, we have been agonizing, no? Considering the loss of livelihood and loss of source of income. The wait-and-see attitude for almost 5 years stagnated our economy. It's only after 1996 did we think of going back, growing, and developing.
The jungles around Pinatubo have been home to an Aboriginal people called the Aitas for centuries. Living off the land on the mountain's remote slopes, theirs was a way of life time had passed by.
We are going to the village of the Aitas, and the main problem there now is poverty. And many of the Aitas are hungry and malnourished. They have no food to eat because their habitat, it was the mountain, where they used to plant, where they used to hunt. They were all destroyed by the eruption of Mount Pinatubo.
The eruptions forced the Aitas to leave their mountain retreats and live, at least briefly, in resettlement areas. Life among city dwellers proves hard for them. Here, everything is foreign, and with no formal education, they cannot find jobs to support themselves, and often become targets of discrimination.
Yeah, they don't like to mix with the non-Aitas because they have their own culture, their own tradition, and yeah, they cannot live normally with other people.
This is why most returned to the mountains as soon as they could. Yet here too, only hardship seems to await them.
They are having much difficulty now, especially their food, especially during this rainy season. They do not have food to eat. Though they have plants, but their plants have not produced very well. They have no problem about their foods before the Pinatubo erupted because they planted and they harvest their vegetables. So they have plenty of food to eat and they can even sell some of them. Kagalingan na pinagkaloob niyo sa mga batang ito. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Reverend Wilson and his wife Cora have been working with the Aitas since before the mountain erupted. Their long-term commitment has won the trust of many tribal members.
She will be staying with us this coming year. We're just waiting. This is Divina, and he's only already 1 year old. And I call him Solomon because he doesn't know him yet, so I call him Solomon.
The Wilsons believe that the Aitas' future lies with their children. That is why they run a school, especially for them.
Teach them and nurture them, not only in the ways of the Lord, but also teach them how to read, how to write, how to compute, and then later on they will be the one to come out and then teach their own people. They will be the one to minister to their own people. And in that way, the Aita people will be improved in their life.
It's hard for adults to change the way they view the world. This mountain is the home of their people, and better or worse, they wish to stay here. But like parents the world over, they also wish for a better life for their children.
Yes, he realized that they themselves as parents haven't gone to school and they don't like their daughter to be like them.
We are praying na the Lord will help them to have their own livelihood so that they can support themselves. There are no jobs. The mountain is destroyed by lahar. Their hunting ground, there were no more wild animals to hunt. They were all gone. So life becomes very, very hard for the Aitas.
Along with the resettlement camps, the government is building some sediment dams to try and protect people in the valleys. But this government does not have the same resources as the Japanese, and the areas being impacted are on a much larger scale than those around Shimabara.
Right now we're only dealing with 3 river systems. It used to be 9, now it's only 3. So we can concentrate resources to these river channels.
But for the most part, the timetable for recovery here is one that Mother Nature dictates, and it is one that people on the west coast of the United States could someday face as well.
You see, some volcanologists would be classifying volcanoes as long sleepers. In other words, they have not done anything during the past 100, 200, 300 years. And volcanoes of that type would tend to have big explosions when they erupt, like Pinatubo. Stayed quiet for about 400 years, and after that, it gave a big blow. So something like that may happen in some volcanoes in the Cascades.
If there is one volcano in the Cascades that concerns scientists the most, it is Mount Rainier. Its massive size, steep slopes, and snow-covered peak create such an image that the hundreds of thousands who live around it wait in anticipation to catch sight of it on a clear day. Yet it is these very same features that worry scientists, and their concerns are based on experience.
In 1985, there was a large ice-covered volcano similar to Mount Rainier in Colombia that erupted. Its name is Nevada del Ruiz. It produced a relatively small eruption that melted lots of snow and ice and produced very large volume mud flows.
At Nevada del Ruiz, over 23,000 people died as they were swept away by mud flows. A tiny eruption on a snow-covered volcano makes a lot of water. The water rushes down the volcano. Volcanoes are composed of loose debris. The debris is included in this flood and it turns into this wall of flowing concrete. It's moving at perhaps 40 to 60 miles an hour, and it comes tearing down the valleys, basically just consuming and engulfing everything in its path.
We view Mount Rainier as an analog to Nevada del Ruiz. It's a snow and ice covered volcano. It erupts relatively frequently. It has deep valleys leading away from it, and there are now tens of thousands of people living in those valley bottoms on deposits from old mud flows.
One valley community located closest to Mount Rainier is named Ording. It has a population of about 3,000 and growing. The city itself is situated on an island of sorts.
The city itself is in a flat, very flat area between the two rivers of the Puyallup and the Carbon. But what we are sitting on is a mud flow that was generated from Mount Rainier.
If Rainier generated a mud flow now, evacuating this town would be difficult. This issue recently came to light in Ording because of a Washington state law called the Land Use Management Act. It requires communities with identified hazards to have an evacuation plan. The information gained while developing one for Ording has caused some of the town's officials to take the threat of mud flows more seriously. Ording's evacuation plan is now based on what they think would be a worst-case scenario.
The time frame in which it could impact the city varies from 40 minutes to 2 hours. There's a lot of variables on what would slow it down. But the worst case scenario is a 40-foot wall of mud right where we're standing right at this point.
One problem the town would face during an evacuation is traffic jams. There are only 2 roads leading out of harm's way, and they both cross bridges. Another concern is that Ording's current warning system consists of a single siren at the fire station. Unless more are added, there is no way the entire community would even be able to hear an alarm.
What people need to do is, when the evacuation warning system has been activated, they need to just pack up their family and follow the evacuation route that's been prescribed to their area and do just what it says, because if you try to do anything other than that, you could complicate the entire evacuation plan.
This is why he says now is the time for residents to learn what to do. If they wait until there is an actual emergency, it will be too late.
What they really need to understand is that they are on their own. There are no public agencies there to help them. That if they are told or given the indication that they have to leave the city, they have to leave the city, and they will not get any assistance from us. If you don't have a car, make arrangements with your neighbors to have them pick you up. Have them come over and get you. But these are things you have to do because we are not available. We have our own problems. We have to get out as well.
Some residents are critical of the attention talk of needing better warning systems has brought to Orting. They feel their community is being hurt by negative publicity over something that may never even happen.
I'm in the real estate business, and the concern I have is you're forgetting about the small town atmosphere, how nice our town is here, how the community, we have a real good community, and it's all that's been forgotten because of the mountain. And my family's lived here since the 40s. If I didn't think it was safe, I wouldn't be here.
They also want people to realize that if Orting is in trouble, so are a lot of other communities located in the lowlands around Mount Rainier.
Orting, 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 that's all you ever hear in the media is Orting. And what I want to see is the whole picture shown from the tide flats, from the east, from Enumclaw, all the other places where the mud flow or whatever would happen, could happen. It's just not Orting.
It is not just Orting. In the past, Mount Rainier has generated mud flows that have traveled all the way to Puget Sound. So any community that inhabits a valley leading away from the mountain lies in the path of potential danger.
Unfortunately, the information that scientists have passed along to public officials about the nature and volume and character of mud flows at Mount Rainier is accurate. And that is to say that the volumes of mud that have been involved in past mud flows at Mount Rainier are truly colossal in size. And mud flows have filled some valleys to depths of 1,000 feet or more as they pass through the valley. It sort of passes through the valley like a giant wave. And so after the wave goes down valley, it leaves a deposit smeared onto the valley sides and in the valley bottom, sometimes quite thick, tens of feet thick.
If a flow is generated by an eruption, geologists are confident there will be prior warning. Warnings that can be detected by the Pacific Northwest Seismographic Network based at the University of Washington. The network is comprised of 135 seismograph stations that cover most of Washington and Oregon to monitor earthquakes. 1/3 of these stations are specifically testing volcanoes, so unless Mother Nature throws a curve, this equipment will help provide advanced warning to volcanic activity.
Which means that in general, I feel anyway, that almost always you will get some type of earthquake precursory signals before an eruption occurs. Inevitably, when the magma comes up into the volcano, it must break rock. And the breaking of the rock is what an earthquake is. We record those, and if we're clever enough, we can interpret that in terms of how much magma, how long will it take to come here, what are the chances of it being explosive or not. And we've gotten good enough that in many cases we've been able to warn populations ahead of time and alert the civil authorities, etc., to actually save lots of lives.
Saving lives is what Bill Lokey's job is all about.
I would love to get on there.
The Pierce County Department of Emergency Management is responsible for disaster planning, how to reduce the potential, and how to train people what to do when it happens. It coordinates all the different agencies that are thrust together in emergency situations.
And volcano hazards are some of the hardest ones to deal with because they represent what could be the most catastrophic disaster to ever occur in this country. And yet things like that occur on such infrequent intervals to the tens of thousands of years that it's hard for people to grasp what's going on. So we have information ready to go about volcanoes, and depending on what happens, if something starts going like Mount St. Helens, we can start a vigorous public education program so people will understand what's going on and be able to respond better to it.
Emergency plans concerning volcanoes in the Northwest rely heavily on having advanced warning that something is about to happen at the mountain. Agencies say other budgetary priorities make it hard for them to keep readiness at the highest level possible, especially when the event in question may not occur for years to come.
I can't afford to have a flood plan, a volcano plan, hazardous materials plan, search and rescue plan, space invasion plan, all these different things like that. We have an emergency plan. that accommodates getting organized to respond with information to emergencies. Our main primary purpose in government is to do the most good for the most people. And so if we have a plan that approaches it on a community basis, if we have warning like Mount St. Helens gave us, we can do a tremendous amount of things to save a lot of lives and property and get people out of the way and reroute traffic and things like that. If we have no warning, the best we can do is do the best we can to get people out of the way.
Though most geologists say the odds are low, it is possible that landslides or mud flows at mountains like Rainier can occur without warning.
It's possible that a major collapse or a flank slope collapse of Mount Rainier could be either spontaneous, no warning whatsoever, or triggered by a local earthquake. The geologists tell us there's evidence in the deposits now that this has occurred in the past. It's hard to judge what the chances of that, how likely that is to another case. Currently, we're actually thinking about warning systems that could give maybe a half an hour's worth of warning should such a thing occur. The technology exists to do that. It's a matter of funding to put it in place, training and maintenance, all of which are very significant issues, not to mention the social issue of, is that even a wise thing to do?
This debate is treated differently city to city and county to county. Pierce County has begun to restrict development in areas that could be at risk to volcanic activity. Yet the incorporated cities within the county have less stringent rules, allowing for more development.
From a public policy standpoint, I can't fault them. I mean, when the vitality of your community is based on some development, what's reasonable? And if we were to shut development down in some of these towns, they would die on the vine. And nothing happens in 10,000 years, what good have we done, But something too, the investments, if you never have a wreck in your car, what a waste of money that car insurance was. But just in case something happens, it was good to have it. So each jurisdiction gets to decide what is reasonable for them.
What is reasonable? This can be difficult to determine, especially when the possibility of an eruption appears unlikely. However, America's neighbors just south of the border are dealing with these very same questions on a daily basis, and they are far from hypothetical. Since 1994, Popocatépetl, located in central Mexico, has been living up to its name, producing small and medium-sized eruptions.
Actually, the name of Popocatépetl derives from this activity. Popocatépetl means smoking mountain in the Aztec language, so it's a common phenomenon.
But at times, Popocatépetl has done more than just clear its throat.
We can distinguish extremely violent eruptions, probably comparable to that of Pinatubo, or maybe even larger.
Despite the fact that Popo and many smaller volcanoes in this area have been active since even before the Aztecs started calling them by name, the heart of Mexican civilization is located just 30 miles away. The pulse of the country's culture echoes through its capital, Mexico City. From the Aztecs to the Spanish to the present federal government, this has been the seat of power. About 20 million people live here, and in large part they consider themselves beyond the reach of Popo's power. Prevailing winds have made ash fall on this city's streets uncommon during Popocatépetl current activity. But for others living closer to the mountain, dealing with ash has become a nuisance of everyday life. Since the area surrounding Popocatépetl is heavily populated, the mountain is monitored very closely. The job of tracking what is happening here belongs to the National Center for the Prevention of Disasters, known as CINEPRED. CINEPRED fills a similar role as that of the USGS. Its people collect and analyze data from the volcano. They then pass on their information to the government agencies that must decide if and when evacuations are required. The fact that the mountain could be active for years to come makes the need for accurate, in-depth information on what the volcano might do next vital.
This activity could last for years, so it is not a threat of days that it is easy to take a decision in this case to evacuate, and then when it is finished you can bring people back. But this could last maybe 10 years.
Hazard maps have been developed to help identify which areas are most susceptible to the mountain's activity.
It was decided to make a hazard plan in order to detect all the ways out. That includes, for example, in this inner circle here, 30 communities, and we're talking about 100,000 people just in that. If you go farther to this level or this one here, well, you're talking about 1 million people, more or less. So the problem we could have if the Popocatépetl has an eruption, it's very big. So we are working with the federal, state, and municipal authorities in order to make this plan work.
And this process does not end when a hazard plan is in place.
A plan like this is never ended. It's never finished. So you have to work every day. The roads, for example, that before the rainy season are all right, within 4 months you have to repair them. So you're never quite ready. You have to be pushing all this program every time.
Evacuations have taken place. At one point, when 50,000 people were removed from a hazard area, it took about 9 hours. And then people were not allowed to return to their homes for 5 days. A fact that did not sit well with most villagers. Trying to predict how the public will respond to emergency situations can be as difficult as determining what the mountain might do.
Well, they have been living there for centuries, and especially the old people are very tied to their land and what they produce. So it's not too easy to ask them to leave their homeland. But I think that the young people are very aware of the danger, and I would say that 99% of the people know what to do. But of course, it has to be done with discipline and order, otherwise it could be more dangerous.
The best way to ensure discipline and order during an emergency is to make sure that the people have received prior education about what to expect and how to respond.
I would say that the better you understand the problem, the better prepared you are to deal with it.
The government has used everything from traveling displays to the media and pamphlets to try and educate residents as to what they should do before, during, and after an eruption. It has also devised a method of keeping communities informed on the mountain's status on a moment-to-moment basis. The concept is called the Traffic Light Alert System. Lights or colored flags are displayed continuously in the towns surrounding the mountain.
If it's green, there is no problem. If it's yellow, you must remain alert and remain communicated and try to know what's going on. And if the traffic light changes to red, it means something really serious going on, and then you have to do whatever you are told. For instance, leaving your town or whatever.
The system's simple design is meant to eliminate misinterpretation of the information, but it is not a perfect solution.
We have been in the yellow conditions since 1994. Now, who and how is decide how to change color in either direction? Well, that's another difficult problem.
Under current circumstances, the Mexican government feels it is doing everything it can to protect its citizens. However, most people involved with the process admit the system is not infallible. To improve upon it, they say they need the help of individuals.
Normally, society says that the government is obliged to inform, which is right. But I think that we have to make a conscience with the people, and they have to go and get the information in the agencies that are set up for. So I think that's the best advice, not wait that the government informs you. You have to go and ask for information, and maybe you can save your life.
This attitude is one shared by officials and geologists alike the world over.
As we learn more, we're able to better anticipate when a volcano is reawakening and the types and scales of eruptions that it might have. But we can't, with our tools, sanitize the world for your protection. There's some places where people simply should not build their houses, and certainly not critical facilities. Or if they do so, they should be prepared to lose those when volcano reawakens.
I think the bottom line is that there are a number of volcanoes in the Cascade Range that could go from a quiet state, such as they are at right now, into a full-blown eruption within a few days' warning. Those of us who live in the Cascade Range or near the range who are involved in some way have to be prepared, and we have to anticipate the kinds of things that will happen, and we have to make preparations now while we have time.
Though these images are from far-off lands, they need not be. One look at St. Helens should serve as a reminder that everyone along America's west coast could soon be forced to deal with a similar situation. For within each of these giant beauties, there is a sleeping beast, and you can enjoy the company of one without possibly meeting the other when it wakes.
Malo klavjerčka. Sad ćemo malo ozbiljnije. Nadam se da se čujemo. Da. Idemo sada baš ću na ovo prilijepiti. Da. Tako da ne treba ni da menjam ništa. Biće to odmah. Mislim da je to sada to. Čekaj da vidimo. Da. Kako vam se sviđalo ovo? Da vidimo malo kontakta u live-u. Moke, to je bio tek početak, znaš. Imam još pripremljeno. Nadam se da sada nešto sam se trudio i da sam podesio nešto u međuvremenu. Nešto sam i popio. Tako da bit će još malo. Ovo su sve što sam prvo gledao da nađem novije stvari. Jer za novije stvari znamo da postoje bolji snimki i da se ima više podatka, analiza, šta god. I kako se kaže, statistike, evo. Tu Mount Merapi je dokaj nepoznat vulkan, a isto tako je vrlo aktivan. To su podatki i slike iz 2011, 2010. I tu uvijek je bilo žrtava. Uvijek su žrtve kod vulkana. Vulkan je kao, ne znam, tsunami. Ne može se da se zaustavi. Oni su prije rekli, da, to sam htio da se nadovežem na onaj video, da oni sve to što su napravili, oni se nadaju da će biti neki prekursor, znači ili neki zemljotres ili nešto više ovog gasa ili onog gasa kad fotografiraju i da će nešto narasti, da se poznaje na GPS-u, ali ponekad vulkani, kao neki u Čiliju za kog su mislili da je mrtav, probudi se bez nikakvog znaka, znači ni potresa, ni to, ni ono. On je samo pali, ide stari, to. Tako da oduševio sam se vulkanima već puno i nažalost i ovdje sam našao kao uvijek treba nam da manipuliraju ljudi, uvijek trebaju. Ne znam zašto, recimo ovaj radio, ok, dobro, htjeli su da prikaže kako ga je spalio, ali ovaj radio definitivno nije bio ovdje. Kako znam, ovdje vidim na ručki da ga je neko primao i premaknuo, donesao ovdje. Ovdje jeste linija kao da je ležao tu, ali nije ležao tu. Jer ako bi ležao tu, onda bi tu bilo nešto spaljeno. Jeste to original slika od kasetnika kojega je visoka temperatura istopila od tih piroklastičnih valova. Tako da, zašto treba da prave ove montaže? Zbog efikasnosti, ne znam, meni mi je ovo najviše efikasno. Ne treba mi sada nešto promijeniti, vidi se ovdje da ovaj radio nije bio ovdje. Sigurno. Tako da, zašto? Pa dobro, ok, ima neki fotografski efekat i to, ali meni realnost mi je mnogo više realna. To je realnost, kako se kupljao recimo jednog čovjeka koji je izgoreo, kako liječio kravu koja je preživjela, na sreću. Ovo je realnost. Ja bi samo napomenuo, Moke, da kod vulkana imamo puno stvari koje može da te ubije. Znači, počinjemo od gasova, još prije erupcije, može da budu gas emissions, znači, kako oni kažu to, kad dolazi lava gore, onda smanji se pritisak, pa se gasovi izbace iz tog kamena ili šta god da je, iz lave. I ti mogu da su prvi oni koji ubijaju. Onda je sama eksplozija vulkana, znači kad i onaj zračni pritisak, ne znam da ste svjesni vi, ali zrak je vrlo teška snov. Nije nešto zanemarljivo, jako je prosvojan, jako ga dišemo ali niko ne shvaća od nas, i ja nisam shvatio, niko nas to ne uči, to je problem. Šta je zrak u stvari? On je vrlo destruktivan. Ako se miče velikom brzinom, on može da te ubije. I to ne samo da rečemo, nego baš tako. Znači, bili smo kod gasova, eksplozija, da, i onda dolaze prvo ti oblaki dima i pepela, kako oni kažu, pepeo i Moke ima pravo, tu nema ništa tamo da bi gorela neka drveće ili nešto da bi tvorilo pepeo. To jeste kamen ili u takvom je stanju da je kao više sliči na neko staklo. Poslije su to, kad je erupcija već u fazi, kad već neko vreme, možda samo 3 minuta, ali to je dovoljno. Vulkan je već proradio i onda dolaze na red pyroclastic flows, znači valovi, oni vrućevi, koji steriliziraju zemlju. Negdje se brže popravi, negdje teže, ali sigurno steriliziraju jer su visoke temperature u igri. A dobro, možda oni koji su na nekoj određenoj daljini ili su niži, da tako kažem, jer oni se sabiraju isto u plasti. Možda nešto negdje ostane i preživi, ali ako imaš metar i po 2 metra sigurno neće ništa više da proradi, da tako kažem. Možda neke anaerobične, znači one bakterije koje ne trebaju kisik, ona će preživjeti i to. Da, i ekstremofili. Ali... Da, zavisi gdje, u kakvoj okruženju se nalaze. Tu nismo završili još, jer kad jednom počinje vulkan da proradi, onda imaju i lava bombe, znači to su kameni velikosti od hladnjaka, mikrovalovnih pečica, automobila, kuća, nebodera koje ljete naokolo i ako ti to pogode, gotovo je. Recimo da je neki pralni stroj i da ti padne na nogu, ostaneš tamo. Najvjerovatnije. I šta je zadnje, ali ne najnedužnije, da tako kažem, to su lahari. Oni su baš, kako da kažem, strah i teror, jer ono traje godinama, desetljeća da oni ne ubijaju više i ne prave štetu. Ova gospođa nije htjela da napusti kuću, pa su zvali specijalce da joj ponese. Sram ih bilo. Dobro, uvijek ima toga. A ima i dobrih stvari. Uhvatili su i lopove koji su krali tamo. Šta je još zanimljivo? Zanimljivo je da ovi takozvane eksplozije i to ne ide više od toliko u zrak, što isto tako prikazuje kako je zrak otporan i kako ga mi ne prihvaćamo kao nešto opasno ili teško ili da treba razmišljamo o zraku kao malo ga, kako da kažem, resnije shvatiti. Kao tekućinu, vodu, likvid. Jer zamislite, idete 200 na sat i iznenada staviš ruku kroz okno ili kroz krov, ili iskočiš, otvoriš krov i iskočiš van. Pokušajte. Ne, nemojte pokušati, molim vas. Kod 100 na sat stavite ruku van iz prozora, iznenada. To napravite. Da, to je i sada prva od tih vulkana koje sam sabrao na brzinu. I sada ima još, to je Merapi. Da. Merapi. To opet novog. Znači, to je od 2014. godine. Isto tako nešto novo, da tako kažem. Da pogledamo ovdje slikce sa Indonezije. $30,000 ljudi je bilo evakuirano. Sad zamislite ovo, gledajte to. Dobri su ovi, da su još tu. Ja ne bi bio. Sa ovim što znam, evo to. Wow. Evo, to je Mount Sinabung. Nisam znao koji je vulkan ovo bio. Dobro, imali su sreću. Nije dosta ljudi poginulo, ali to je više sreća nego nešto drugo. Kako vidite, i ovdje su stradali, jer ne može se objeći ono kad dolazi pyroclastic flow, teško je izbjeći. Da, tako da i do 5 km su išli ovi pyroclastic flows. Tako da ovaj nije pobjegao. I kako se vidite, ovdje i nije bila tako strašna temperatura. Guma je još, ima zrak unutra. Ovo nije stopljeno. Tako da nije bila, možda je bilo, ne znam, 300 stepeni za par sekundi, pa je onda sve skupa diglo i ohladilo. Ali dovoljno je, 10 sekunda na 300 stepeni čovjek neće proživjeti. Ne bih rekao. Gledajte koliko su to. I vidite i ovaj Sleeping Giant. Prije 2010. Mount Sinabung has been dormant for 400 godina. Ništa, on spavao lijepo. Takete. I onda bežite ljudi. Evo, ove nose maske, ali ovi imaju razloga. To su ti piroklastični valovi. Kako silaze. U danu izgleda ovako, ali u noću to je to. To se vidi ovako. I to zasipa ljude dole. Ide vrlo brzo. Vidite da svi teli uglovi od hriba su strmi. Tako da kad jednom ovo se utrže dole, bolje da nisi u tom smjeru gdje se ta stvar premiče. Evo sad da podijelimo malo još ovo. Dok ne nađem novi link. Onda vidimo ovdje sada. Da, mogu ovo, evo. I zaustaviti polako i pričati. Možda će mi, ne znam da li će mi prekinuti stream, ali dobro, ja se ne bojim, pa Idem. Tako da nisam na pravom oknu. To je video koji će mi vrlo olakšati rad. Jer sam sam tu.
Ticking time bombs that could...
I treba da kako da kažem podesim se sam. Tu ću se zaustaviti više puta da izložim par stvari, ali mislim da bit će dokaj brzo. Ajde idemo.
Can alter the shape of the world. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be counting down our picks for the top 10 devastating volcanic disasters. For this list, we're counting down our picks of the most destructive volcano eruptions. These are ranked by a mix of explosive power, environmental impact, and human death tolls. We're also only including incidents that occurred within recorded human history, so we won't be counting Indonesia's Lake Toba eruption around 75,000 years ago. Number 10. Mount Pinatubo, Philippines. The power of a natural explosion is measured by the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or
Evo, od ovoga smo pogledali prije šta je bilo, taj Mount Pinatubo, 91.
or VEI, which ranks incidents on a scale from 0 to 8. The eruption of Mount Pinatubo earned a 6 rating, which qualifies it as the second largest volcanic explosion in the 20th century. It caused magma flows and ash deposits that left 100,000 homeless and 847 dead. And thanks to the 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide emitted, resulting in damage to the ozone, the world's temperature dropped a whole degree Fahrenheit in the following year. Number 9. Lake Ilopango, El Salvador. With a VEI of 6, Ilopango was catastrophic in scale. It covered central El Salvador in waist-deep ash for over 3,800 square miles and killed an estimated 30,000 people.
Sve to pretpostavljaju, da se razumijemo.
This area is notable because it was one of the places where the Mayans called home, that is, until Ilopango erupted. The explosion effectively displaced the civilization, forcing the residents to flee to northern El Salvador and Guatemala. And because the volcanic fallout would have destroyed crops and livestock for thousands of miles, the Mayans had to resettle permanently. Number 8. Huayna Putina, Peru. This was South America's largest eruption in recorded history. The volcano exploded with a VEI 6 force, sending volcanic matter many miles in each direction. Mud and lava flows destroyed villages, killed 1,500 people, and only stopped once it reached the Pacific Ocean almost 75 miles away. The wake was worse than the blast though, as earthquakes rattled the region and sulfurous gas ruined the atmosphere.
Evo, ovaj vulkan recimo je prešao 100 km i tek se zaustavio kad je došao do mora. Da poudarim, ovo je VIA 6, znači 6. stopnja eksplozivnosti, a ima ih 8.
Historians cite this eruption as the cause of the Great Russian Famine, as the compromised atmosphere lowered temperatures and ravaged crops, killing a third of Russia's people. Number 7. Mount Baekdu, China and North Korea. Few eruptions in human history have registered a 7 on the VEI scale, but Mount Baekdu was one of the deadly few. It ejected ash over 15 miles high and more than 745 miles away.
I ovo je jezero koje sad prikazuje, to je Crater Lake, znači iz ovdje, kada je bila tada erupcija, ako je bila, je sve bilo ono dim, lava, pyroclastic flows, sve živo je ovdje izašlo.
Covering the Sea of Japan and reaching as far as Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island. The blast also created a crater that is 2.7 miles wide and over 2,700 feet deep, which is now a lake and a popular tourist destination. While the death count is unknown, thousands were presumably killed due to the location and scope of the eruption. Number 6. Mount Pelée, Martinique. The lead up to this eruption is perhaps more unsettling than the blast itself. St. Pierre was a city located at the base of Mount Pelée on the island of Martinique. After the volcano reportedly started shaking, bubbling, and foreshadowing the disaster, hordes of snakes, rats, centipedes, and biting insects fled from the mountain and terrorized the posh resort city. It was said that dozens of fatalities occurred from animal bites before the volcano even exploded.
Ova je dobra. Životinje pobjegle iz vulkana i više od 12 ljudi, znači u dozens, oni kažu tako, u dozinama ljudi oni su umirali zbog toga što su ih ujeli insekti ili zmije ili nešto.
Then came the VEI-4 eruption, which buried the city in lava and ash and killed about 30,000 people.
I ovdje pretpostavljaju 30,000 ljudi da je umrlo i samo je bila VEI 4, znači mala erupcija, tako da kažem. Nije mala, 4 je dovoljno velika, ali vidite dobro sami, 30,000 ljudi jer je bila na pogrešnom kraju. Stari kraj je, gdje su živjeli ljudi bio je preblizu vulkana.
Legend has it only 2 people survived, which, while not true, is not that far off either. Number 5. Mount Vesuvius, Italy. Mount Vesuvius is legendary for the devastation it has caused. The stratovolcano has erupted multiple times since humans colonized the area, but its eruption in 79 AD was the worst of them all. The VEI-5 explosion buried the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum in many feet of ash, rock, and lava. It is estimated that over 16,000 people were killed, with preserved bodies still being uncovered today. Many died in exceptionally horrifying ways, as the rapid heat expulsion vaporized bodies and caused people's heads to explode. Worryingly, not only does Vesuvius
ovdje sam se htio da se zaustavim. Sada ako pogledate ovu sliku, znači sa lijeve strane, tamo gdje se kreće barka, u smjer gdje ide barka sa lijeve strane, vidite kako nedostaje deo tog vulkana. To je sve bilo tada kada je, znači kad je bio 492. prije štetja, tada je to odbilo sve ovaj cijeli hrib. I to što vidite iznad barke, iznad broda, to je sada što je na novo izgradio Vezuvio. I zato i kažem, možda treba još da naraste, ali sigurno, ako ne mi, sljedeća generacija će možda 2-3, ajde. Ja mislim da neće narasti na kako je bio prije, znači s lijeve ono kako je bio hrib, da će prije još proraditi jer ima vrlo kratko vrijeme, ono vrlo često aktivan je.
Remain active to this day, but also millions still live in its blast radius. Number 4. Laki, Iceland. The Laki eruptions lasted 8 months and plagued the northern hemisphere. After the initial explosion registered a 6 on the VEI scale, a series of emissions were triggered that released lava and volcanic gas. For parts of 2 years, these fissures ejected chemicals that poisoned the atmosphere. People choked to death on the fumes, livestock were killed, and soil was rendered unusable. Drastic weather changes occurred worldwide and famine was felt from Africa to Asia. A quarter of Iceland's population was killed from the blast and its aftermath, while it's estimated that 6 million people in multiple continents died from the fallout.
Znači, Laki eruption, šta je za njega značilno? On nije ubio nikoga sa lavom, sa lava bombi, sa piroklastim flowom ili sa pepeom. On je ubio samo gasom. Tako da je dobro preplavio je i napravio nekoliko štete i sa lavom. Puno je toga izvadio van, da tako kažem, izbruhnio, ali njegova smrtonosna bila je gas.
Number 3. Krakatoa, Indonesia. Krakatoa blew itself up, literally. The volcanic island exploded into oblivion after the VEI 6 blast, which had the power of 13,000 Hiroshima bombs.
Znači, 13.000 izmišljenih Hiroshima bombi je bio ovaj vulkan, jaka eksplozija, jednaka kao 13.000 tih atomskih bomba. I da, tu je značajno za ove žrtve, ovi su više ili manje umrli od samog baš blasta, znači šok od zraka.
It can be heard 3,000 miles away. Besides destroying the island, Krakatoa caused tsunamis 150 feet high, sent volcanic debris as far as South Africa, and even rippled the English Channel. Enough ash was released to obscure part of the sun, causing global cooling for several years. Over 35,000 people perished on the nearby islands, with many dying purely from the shock of the blast.
A da, i tu je povedao, evo vidiš. Jeste napravio tsunami i od toga su umrli ljudi, ali džabe ti tsunami kad si ti već mrtav. Znači prvo dolazi šok i tek poslije dolazi tsunami i sve ostalo. Tako da šok je baš ono prva stvar koja dolazi u eksploziju uvijek. Prvo je onaj baš šok, onda je heat wave, pa drugi šok. Da.
Number 2. Thera, Greece. Located on the island now known as Santorini, the Thera or Minoan eruption exploded over 3,500 years ago, and its effects are still felt today. In a 20-mile radius of the blast zone, ash deposits 100 feet thick are present, and at the bottom of this ash lays the ancient Minoan civilization of Akrotiri. The VEI 7 explosion preserved the city in perpetuity, and the site is rife with buildings and artifacts. It is thought that Thera, as well as biblical plague stories, inspired the Atlantis legend. The truthfulness of these theories remains blurred, though the fact that this was one of the largest volcanic events on Earth in recorded history cannot be denied.
Što se tiče ovoga, ako želi neko istraživati, a možda ću ja nešto više pripremiti, to je vulkan Thera. T-H-E-R-A.
Before we unveil our top pick, here are a few dishonorable mentions.
Evo ovo je Nevada del Ruiz, kojega su kao isključili, ali smo vidjeli prije da je ubio cijelo mjesto 25.000 ljudi u jednoj noći. Mount St. Helen, 57 smrtnih žrtava. Da, ovaj je dobar dokumentarac, Minute by Minute. Lijepo objašnjavaju šta se dešavalo, iako tada nisu imali pojma, ali su poslije složili nekako sliku ove erupcije, jer su naučniki ipak pratili cijelo vrijeme i sa zraka i sa kamerama i sa merilnim instrumentima, ali još uvijek priznaju da nemaju pojma, tako da...
Number 1. Mount Tambora, Indonesia. In 1815, Mount Tambora exploded with the energy of 2 million atomic bombs. The VEI 7 eruption was 100 times more powerful than Mount Vesuvius and 10 times more powerful than Krakatoa. It tore 4,000 feet off the mountain, killed all the vegetation on the island, and expelled so much chemical ash that much of the world went without a summer in 1816. Widespread disease and famine predictably occurred, which reportedly, along with the initial blast, killed as many as 100,000 people. As volcanic disasters go, Tambora is a hard act to follow. Do you agree with our list? Which eruption fact shocked you the most? For more stupefying top 10s published daily, be sure to subscribe to WatchMojo.com.
Evo, hvala WatchMojo.com. što su nam prikazali nešto, njihov izbor. Meni recimo posljednji, iako je mnogo, kako da kažem, velik i opasan, nije tako strašan kako jesu neki drugi. Recimo, gdje imam sada? Tal, evo ga. A počinjem od odzadi, da. Ne, šta sam napravio? A da, dobro. Da. Znači, Tal nije toliko znan vulkan, ali meni se ne sviđa to što je još uvijek aktivan, a pritom imao je grozne, da tako kažem, erupcije. Sad treba da promijenim ovo. Sad tu lijepo možete da vidjeti šta je Tal. Tal je volcano within a lake between a volcano. Sada ćete vidjeti. Baš je zanimljivo. Znači, ovo je jezero sada, ali je isto tako kaldera. Usred ovog jezera ima otok, Izola, a na tom otoku je taj vulkan što je sa crvenim označen. Da vidim, nema više tu toga, onda treba da prebacim link. Ovaj vulkan je ogroman, baš je mega i još uvijek je aktivan. I šta mi je najviše brine recimo oko njega, recimo za Katlu se zna jer ti oblasti iz Islanda javno su pozvali i Europsku uniju i Združene narode, United Nations, one su pozvale da treba da se pripreme jer Katla je jedan od vulkana koji je sada na redu, da tako kažem, da se probudi. I sada čekamo da se naloada ovo. Aha, naložilo se. Znači, gdje ga možemo vidjeti? Lijepo. Ne, ni ova nije dobra slika. Jer ovo je Tal vulkano. Nadam se da vidite moju ruku. Sada aktivan. Ovdje ima unutra jezero. Ali isto tako ovo jezero, to je sve Tal vulkan. Aktivni. Izgleda da nije ovaj vaš dobar link. Pa da, tako je, izvinite, tako je kad ja to uživo. Pripremio sam, ali nedovoljno dobro. Da vidimo ako može ova. Da vidimo ako će pokazati, inače lijepo je prikazano jer su originalne fotografije iz 1911. I imamo detaljnu i još uvijek nemamo ni jednu sliku kako su napravili ISS u bazenu. Jer u svemiru nisu nikad ni pošli da bi ga mogli da ga naprave. A ja bih volio da vidim kako su ga napravili u bazenu. Da, ovo su stare originalne slikice. Ali ima svašta tu zanimljivo. Aha, tu piše da je Death and Destruction. 1400 je umrlo. Da, izgleda da ovo su fotografije. Meni izgleda kako da je nacrtano sve ovo crno-bijelo, jao. To baš... A da, i fotografije nisu bile u bojama tada možda. Nisu bile, ne. Tu se vidi kako je, recimo, ovo je zanimljivo. Part of the volcano Island submerged during the eruption. Znači, neki dijelovi ovog otoka veliko, kako što sam prije pokazivao, potonulo je. Tu se vidi i žrtve. To je sve originalno. Sada potražim još. Znam da imam, jer sam sačuvao baš je li ova? Nije. Onda je da treba da pronađem prave linke. To ovo je samo, ovo nisam, mislim da. A jesam, a mogu ovako, vidiš, sad ću da live potražim mapu. Ako mi dozvoli da upišem gdje je to. Gdje si, Dak? Zanimljivo. Evo te TAL map. Ovo je daleka, dovoljno. vidimo. Nije dovoljno. Nije dovoljno. Koliko je 500 premalo? 700 premalo. Fotografija. Da vidimo. Ako ima neka. Ova je lijepa. Sada. Ovo je tal. Da vidite vi to, da bi samo čekiram. Da. Ovo je tal, vulkan na sredini. Ovaj. Sada aktivan. Ovdje unutra ima još jedno jezero. A ovo jezero, wow, vidi to. A ovo jezero je isto tako kaldera. Znači, ovo jezero veliko, ovo je originalni vulkan, a ovo je novi vulkan što se sada opet sagrađuje ovaj veliki. Sada kad će on opet ponovno da to raspali kako treba, ne znam, ali opasan je. Da vidimo sada Katla. Da vam prikažem i Katlu, jer Katla je opasna. Da vidimo ako se to...
Breaking Katla volcano in Iceland set to erupt. Iceland's giant Katla volcano is showing signs of an imminent eruption which could far exceed the explosion that caused mass disruption to air worldwide travel 8 years ago. The highly and very active volcano is churning out carbon dioxide, which suggests magma chambers below the surface are filling up. According to researchers, Icelandic and British volcanologists believe the huge amount of gas being emitted by Katla could be a precursor to an eruption which would dwarf that of Eyjafjallajökull in 2010. The Sunday Times reports, the eruption sent a massive cloud of volcanic ash into the sky which quickly spread across Europe, forcing the cancellation of more than 100,000 flights. A research report published in the Geophysical Research Letters journal found that Katla was releasing between 12 and 24 kilotons of carbon dioxide every day, making it one of the largest volcanic sources of CO2 on the planet. The team behind the study said the volcano's cone, hidden beneath a glacier on a 5,000 ft high peak, meant assessing its activity is difficult. The report says Katla has been undergoing significant unrest in recent decades, and by using high-precision measuring equipment, the researchers concluded the amount of gas being released now is much higher than previous estimates. Sarah Barsotti, coordinator for volcanic hazards at the Icelandic Meteorological Office, said, "There is no way of telling when it will erupt, just that it will." Evgenia Ilyinskaya, a research fellow in the Institute of Geophysics and Tectonics at Leeds University, told Icelandic National Broadcasting Service RUV that the current CO2 level suggested an eruption could be imminent. She said, "There must also be a magma buildup to release this quantity of gas. It is well known from other volcanoes, for example in Hawaii and Alaska, that CO2 emissions increase weeks or years ahead of eruptions. This is a clear sign we need to keep a close eye on Katla. She isn't just doing nothing, and these findings confirm that there is something going on."
Nije to baš ono što sam htio da prikažem, nažalost, Ali to jeste kad uživo... ovo može da je. Ne. Ne. Možda ova?
Lava was falling on our house. We had to pack up our stuff and leave in a hurry. My goodness, this is insane. Oh my god. Do you see this glacier up there? That is the...
Ne. Ta. Da vidimo ovaj. Izvinite za ovo.
They call this the entrance to hell, because deep underneath this glacier lies a powerful volcano. It's named after an evil troll, Katla. It last went up in 1918, sending giant chunks of ice down to the sea. Those who were there say it was too magnificent for words. In the nearby village of Vik, they are waiting for Katla to blow again. Yohir runs the wool factory. He heard about the last eruption from relatives who had to flee on horseback and wonders if it will happen again in his lifetime.
There's no way to tell when it'll be. It's been due since 1960, so we can't believe it until it actually happens.
The 1918 eruption brought down so much debris it extended Iceland's southern coastline by 5 kilometers, a vast plain of lava spreading out to sea.
People who live near Katla are not so worried about ash or lava, they're worried about flooding, because glaciers could break up in an eruption and melt, and huge amounts of water would come down from the volcano, sweeping away small communities.
In recent weeks, experts have registered more earth tremors around Katla.
We are seeing some of the signs that are typically taken as precursors to eruptions, but we've seen similar things on a few occasions over the last few decades, and so far they've not led to an eruption. So we could say Katla may erupt, but then again there is, it may take years even.
In Iceland, people have adapted to survive in a harsh environment. They must be ready for anything, because here, nature is fierce and unpredictable. Barnaby Phillips, Al Jazeera, in southern Iceland.
Još uvijek nisu rekli koliko je toga. Znači, krater mislim da je 2 km za 1 km i dubok 800 metara. Pun leda, znači od ruba do ruba. Znači, ako se to istopi, to će biti milijarde kubičnih metra vode. Nešto što nismo još vidjeli ovdje za kratko vreme dok belježimo ovo historiju. Iako znamo da historija nije baš ono što smo učili, ali dobro. Sad da vidimo. Ovo ne bi pustio, ali bi trebao da stavim nešto. Stavit ću jednu muzičku, jer vidim da ovdje sam, sada ću biti zauzet. I poslije, nažalost, evo, ne mogu produžiti. Još je dobro trajalo, evo, dok je trajalo, Šta ćemo za... Aj, počeli smo sa Cameronom, pa da stavimo Camerona još jednom. To će mi biti najlakše jer je već tu. Nisam dozvolio da počneš još. Znači, gdje imam ja to živo? Aha, ovdje. Tako, ja se bi zahvalio sada svima. Nažalost, zauzet sam pa ne mogu produžiti, iako sam htio još koji sat. Ali ništa, ostavljam vas ovu pjesmiju. Hvala za one što ste pratili, hvala za one koji će pratiti i ništa, nadam se da ste vidjeli nešto novo. Ako ne drugog, vidjeli ste kamione kako se voze bez vozača. Tako da, laku noć, pozdrav svima, volim vas, znate dobro. I idemo sa, gdje mi je OBS-ko, evo ga, OBS-ko, cakete. I sada sa pjesmom. Još jednom hvala svima za učestvovanje ovdje, za praćenje mog monologa za kojeg sam se djelomično pripremio, malo smo potražili uživo, nisam znao da neću moći da imam goste, ako ovako na brzinu otvorim, treba biti barem da otvorim Skype i nešto da još neko dolazi, tako da dobro, naučio sam se nešto malo i ja, tako da hvala svima i laku noć.
I'm standing with wings a-gliding on highest mountain top. I'm circling and rings deciding to dive into or not. I can see misty clouds below me, but I can't see through. But I know once I cross that madness, there'll be a beautiful view. There's always too much dividing, two worlds that could be colliding, and sometimes you must leap into the blue. A flash like a bolt of lightning, destined for you. I fly like a raptor flying, looking for you. I blow like the wind is blowing me to somewhere new. And I flow like a river's flowing me, but don't know where to. There's always too much denying, preventing the chance arriving. But we all make our own holes to fall through. Until I am visible to you, I am invincible to you. It seems I'm invincible, it's true, but to be really visible to you, it feels it's impossible to do. I'm still unnoticeable.